so I went to go work for a queen breeder, a small company, not the big one. But and so that was where I saw the process, and I began to understand why the bees had told me, what they did. That the bees have to, in order to be stimulated to produce 50 queens a week, a colony has to be fed sugar. It has to be fed artificial food because it has to be thinking that there's a natural pollen flow, nectar flow. So the royal jelly is actually being transmuted not from the pollen and nectar of their environment, but from brewer's yeast and sugar beet syrup.
That's a horrible pattern. Like you just explained the genetics, and now here they're developing these queen bees with
that's
like this whole different
right?
information.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a mess.
Yeah. So the information is heavily chemical laden. Also, because that diet of sugar water and artificial pollen tends to give them more like an acid problem, acidosis. So their guts become weak and they're susceptible to something called nosema. Nosema is a significant parasite that's related to malaria that lives in their gut and shortens the bee's life by about 1/3 to 1/2. And so, in order to stop the nosema, they feed them Fumidil or some kind of anti-malarial thing, and Fumidil is a known carcinogen, and actually a known mutagen, and has been banned in Europe. I think they're trying to get it unbanned in Europe now, but it was banned in Europe. So and just understanding that like all these bees that are being put into the population every year, 25% are coming from breeder yards that are using heavy chemical artificial feed, and so there's this whole flush of these pseudo bees that are really like, it's like I say, like it's like a hatchery salmon versus a wild salmon, or you can think of like a white chicken raised in a battery cage, versus our feral chickens here. There's the other thing that humans have been doing is we have been suppressing the bees' natural reproduction. Before we started breeding the queens, we were suppressing swarming because that's a problem, because you lose half your population, and so we've been actually suppressing the bees' natural reproduction functions, and now we've kind of overtaken it with our commercial agriculture, and so that is it's a natural reproduction, the wild sex. The queen has to fly at a certain speed before the male's penis and testicles are able to mate with her. So a drone bee has to be healthy enough, strong enough to catch a queen way up high in midair and mate with her. So, and then she carries all that semen with her for her whole life, which might be 6 years. She could live in the wild for 6 years. And meanwhile, she's learning all those traits. So she may not be laying as many workers, but she might, towards the end of her life, she's laying drone eggs. And the drones then are carrying everything that she's learned from her lifetime, right? Because
it's
they're
amazing.
Particularly her 100% genetic.
No one would ever think that bees were so sophisticated.
Yeah, they're very sophisticated. They've been around about at least 40 million years. So they've survived ice ages and asteroids and, all sorts of stuff. And in 100 years, Rudolf Steiner said the breeding of queens, will eventually lead to their extinction. And the beekeepers at the conference in the 1800s were saying, "Oh, how could this be? This is a great advance for beekeeping." And he said, "Well, it won't show up for a long time, but eventually." He said, "Talk to me in 100 years."
Man's killing himself by abusing the nature like that.
So the bee sanctuary then is in a very remote place. The energy is very, very high. It's dry and windy, and there's ocean and scrub forest and pastoral lands, and then more ocean. And so it's one of the cleanest places, not only from chemical pollution and physical pollution, but also from the thought pollution. So the wind, the wind is very cleansing. Like it's just been traveling over the ocean, and it comes in there. So vibrationally for the bees, it's like a relief for them there. And so I began to work for the queen breeders. Started to understand why I was, told to protect these wild bees, or, and I began to gather colonies. I would do hive removals. Like this is a hive removal from a mango tree in an older couple's yard. They didn't want the bees. They wanted to kill them. So I took them, and I was able to. They had built their comb out in the open, and I wanted to let them continue with that. So I just put eye hooks in the thing. And a friend of mine made a carrier, savory, made a carrier so I could set it in, and I just hung them up here. They're doing great. But
so wonderful.
So rescuing the wild hives and with the queens, and transferring them into boxes, because that's what I had. That's what I had. And so I began to put some wild bees down in the sanctuary. And meantime, I was learning about the whole commercial the way that bees are. Because I was never trained as a beekeeper, I had to learn about beekeeping. And indeed, when I first started working for the queen breeders, I was afraid of bees. I did not like to be stung. I wore gloves and all the gear. And by the time I was finished working there, I'm comfortable now, like I am. And I learned how to tune my vibration to there, so that there's no protection required, because you just
yeah, people are they have this unnatural fear of bees, like as if a bee is going to chase them down and attack them and sting them, and it's not the case at all.
Yeah, but that's part of that manufactured fear of nature. And I mean, there's a great book called The Voice of the Infinite in the Small by Joanne Lauk, and it talks about how after World War I, I think, when the chemical industry that had developed for all these poisons for the war, for the biochemical warfare, there was then no market for it after it was banned. After they were banned, there was no market for it, and so that's when they began to. They actually, started campaigns using these as insecticides, using these same chemicals as insecticides and pesticides.
I think even some of our laundry chemicals are the same. Right. They were once military weapons. The bleach is one.
Oh, yeah. So, and in order to get people to spray their food with poison or their houses with poison, they have to think that the insect is worse than the poison. And so there has to be there's an advertising campaign. I mean, just look at any commercials about bugs, and how horrible it is if you have a cockroach.
And so many people now, it's very curious that people have allergic reactions to bees now. And I don't remember hearing about that when I was young.
Yeah.
People are, I think it maybe even partially psychological.
So that's pretty much, then so I started the sanctuary without really even understanding, fully yet why I was doing what I was doing. And then in 2005, I started working there in 2004. In 2005, we started hearing about colony collapse on the mainland. And then I left in 2006.
So it's interesting that you knew about the bee problems before they really materialized. It seems.
I think because I was a biology teacher, I knew, I always knew that there was problems with pollinators, where, lots of pollinators were becoming endangered, native bees, and, I probably heard even that honeybees were not doing as well as they used to. You know, people were having problems with honeybees even before colony collapse. Colony collapse is just like the massive die-off. It's not the slow degradation, you know, the slow inability to thrive, you know.
So what, any other experiences that you've had in the last few years with bees particularly?
Well, so yeah, then in 2006